We're on DAF Hey Amid Beis, at the very bottom line. The Mishnah had described for us a machloikes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel as to, we all know that you're supposed to bring your child with you for the midrabanan, for the sake of chinuch. You're supposed to take him to the Re'iyah with you, which means you have to bring him from Yerushalayim to Har Habayis. We had a machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel as to what the minimum age of that child is supposed to be. According to Beis Shammai, as long as you can carry the child on your shoulders, then that child is under that obligation for you to bring him. And that would mean, as long as he's not an infant, he's got to be old enough that he's not a baby that needs his mother constantly, and that you can hold him on your shoulders. According to Beis Hillel, no, the minimum age is a little bit higher. The child already has to be able to walk, and you can hold him by the hand, and he'll walk with you all the way from Yerushalayim, wherever you are in Yerushalayim, to the Har Habayis. So the Gemara's question is very simple. Maskif la Rabbi Zera ad hacha man asiyeh. So the question is, well, who brought the child all the way to Yerushalayim? In other words, the question is, why is there only a requirement for the child to be able to accompany his father by the hand, or even if being carried, whether Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel, only from Yerushalayim to Har Habayis? We're assuming that the child doesn't need his mother, and that's why he's got to go with his father. But the question is, let's say the family lives in Tzfat, right? So how did the kid get from Tzfat to Yerushalayim without his mother? In other words, why is the obligation only that you should be able to bring the child from Yerushalayim to Har Habayis? It should be that the child is old enough to make the whole trip. So the Gemara's answer is, Amar le Abaye, ad hacha demichai ve'imei besimcha aisise imei. Mikan va'elach in yachol lalos v'lechos biyado shel aviv miYerushalayim lahar Habayis chayav v'ilo patur. So Abaye answers very simply. The mother is going to travel with the rest of the family from Tzfat to Yerushalayim, because women are obligated in the mitzvah of simcha just like men are. What is the mitzvah of simcha? To eat the meat of a korban shlamim. That can only be done in Yerushalayim. She doesn't have to go to Har Habayis to participate in the bringing of the korban, but she has to be there's a mitzvah for her to be in Yerushalayim for the mitzvah of simcha. So therefore the child will be accompanied by his mother. Mommy will take him, and she'll take him all the way from Tzfat to Yerushalayim. And as long as the child is capable of leaving his mother for that short period of time to take daddy's hand and to go from Yerushalayim to Har Habayis, so then you're obligated to take him. You don't need the child to be able to be independent of his mother for that long journey from Tzfat to Yerushalayim. Okay, so now the Gemara says, V'ilo pater, but if not, the child will be pater. So, hey Shiv Rebbe, now there's a problem with the Girsa over here, because this is not Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi, because we're going to see that there's a respondent to this statement which demonstrates that this is not Rebbe speaking. So the Meforshim deal with the problem of the Girsa, and the Rach, Rabbeinu Chananel, has a completely different Girsa over here, and in any event, just that you should know, this is a certain sage. We're not sure who the sage is, but it's called Rebbe, but it's Rebbe someone. Tachas Beis Hillel divrei Beis Shammai. That this sage wants to defend Beis Hillel's position against Beis Shammai. Now remember, what did Beis Hillel argue? The child has to be old enough to walk with his father's hand. Beis Shammai says the child has to be much younger. In order to be, the child is even younger, and there's still an obligation. The child just has to be carried on his father's shoulders. So I can give a response to Beis Shammai as follows. Look at the pasuk in Sefer Shmuel. It says, V'chana lo alsa. Chana, after giving birth to Shmuel, we know that she had made a pledge to Hashem. That she said, I pledge that I will give this child to the temple to be part of the priesthood if you give me a child, says Hashem. But she didn't take the child right away. It says, Ki amra li'isha ad yigomel hanar v'havi yosiv. She said, I'm not going to take him right away. I want to wait until the child is weaned. He still needs his mother. And then I will bring him. And this is talking about making a pilgrimage. So, V'hashmuel diyachol lirkov al ksefo shel aviv hava. What about the fact that Shmuel was old enough, even though he hadn't been weaned yet, but a child who's, let's say, even 1 year old, is old enough to go on his father's shoulders and to be taken up to from Yerushalayim to Harabayis, or in the parallel, from somewhere in Shiloh to the Mishkan in Shiloh. So, according to you, Beis Shammai, this was not a valid excuse that Chana had to not make a pilgrimage with her son Shmuel. Just because he hadn't been weaned yet, according to you, Beis Shammai, the father Elkanah still should have had an obligation to bring the child with him. So Amar Le Avuha. So this is the father of the sage who asked the question, and some are gores that it's Abaya, who's the Amar Le Abaye. So it's not clear who this Rebbe is. It could be maybe it's Rabba, and maybe it's Abaya responding to Rabba. It's not clear. V'li Taimeich Tik Shilach. I don't know how the art scroll reconciles who the two people are speaking here, but V'li Taimeich Tik Shilach Chana Gufa Milo Michai V'Besimcha. So the response that Abaya gives is, now hold on a second, let's look at that story. Maybe you're right, but even according to Beis Hillel, it's no better, because Chana had an obligation of the mitzvah of Simcha if this was a Yom Tov, and therefore she should have come to Shiloh to participate in the sacrificial meat on Yom Tov. Why then, what was her excuse, even according to Beis Hillel? What was her excuse to stay home and not come to Shiloh at all? Because she needed to stay home with her son Shmuel. She should have come with Shmuel, and she should have at least stayed where she was in Shiloh to have meat, or to come from where she was, come with her son Shmuel to Shiloh. Fine. She said, Elkanah, he's too young to make the journey with you from Shiloh to the Mishkan, but at least she should have come herself. Why didn't she come? Elachana mifankusa yasirta chazia be bishmuel, v'chasha be bishmuel l'chul shadu urcha. The answer is that the reason Chana saw something exceptional within Shmuel, he was clearly an exceptional child, and part of his exceptionalism was that he was extremely delicate. And because of his delicate nature, she felt that he would not be able to make the journey, even with mommy with him, to go from where they were living to Shiloh, in order to be able to partake in the karbanos. And therefore she said, no, I'm going to wait till the child's a little bit older, until he's weaned, at the age of 2 or the age of 3, whatever it is, and then we'll bring him to the Mishkan. But this is not a proof to either Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel, because the bottom line is that Shmuel was an exceptional child. But if the child Taka would be healthy enough to come with the mother and make the journey from wherever you are to Yerushalayim, then according to Beis Shammai, Taka, as long as the child can ride on his father's shoulders, you'd have an obligation to bring him. So you can't bring a raya against Beis Shammai from here.
Just for my own clarity, what distance are we talking about? Like, what is the point of Yerushalayim to the Beis Hamikdash? What point is Shiloh to the?
So the way I'm understanding it is that we know that Harabayis is inside Yerushalayim. When we say going from Yerushalayim to the Temple Mount, we mean to say that no matter what point you are within the old city of Jerusalem, which is the original Jerusalem, you have to be able to the child has to be able to make that journey from wherever he is in the old city to get to the Temple Mount.
Was the old city though the same size what we see today?
I don't know. I don't think so.
It's less than 1 kilometer then.
Yeah, probably less than even a kilometer. Okay. Right? Probably. I don't know.
So you can make it from Sfas to Yerushalayim. You can make it from that point.
Yeah, but they're not walking.
No. They're going by wagon. They're going by horse. And he's with his mother. So there's a big difference in a child. When a child's very young, he needs his mother for sustenance, for emotional dependency, and all these other things. That's why it's dafka. The father has to be able to bring him up to Harabayis. Mommy's not going to go to Harabayis. So therefore, the child has to be able to make the journey without his mother from Yerushalayim.
So it's an hour and a half, whatever that is.
Yeah, at most. Okay. Yeah,
that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, but there's like a round trip, right?
Yeah.
And then to stick around, and the kids can't go hysterical, right, when mommy's not with mommy. Okay. Boy, Reb Shimon ben Lakish. So Reish Lakish asked the next question. By the way, does the art scroll tell us who the questioner and the respondents are? Does Steinsaltz tell us? I didn't.
Steinsaltz just says the father of Rabbi.
The father of Rebbe. Okay. I don't know why we wouldn't identify. I think the father of Rebbe was Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel.
It says Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So I don't know why we wouldn't identify him unless there's a point of saying that I'm your father and I would know what you would need if you were a child. Maybe something to that effect.
The round trip you're talking about, but there's likely a bit of a lineup at the big.
Yeah, maybe
hours.
park.
You're like turnstile over there.
Yeah, the place where you park your stroller. Okay, boy, Reb Shimon ben Lakish. Katan chiger ledivrei beishamai v'suma ledivrei shnei hamahu. He has a very interesting shaila. Now we know that if a person is disabled and he can't walk, he's pater from aliyah l'regel. We know that if a person is blind, he's pater. But we also know that a child may not have the same requirements as an adult, because a child, as long as he can hold daddy's hand or go on his daddy's shoulders, he has to be brought. So the question is, what if the child is disabled and can't walk? According to Beis Shammai, he could still go on daddy's shoulders. And what if the child is blind? So if he was an adult, he wouldn't be able to go by himself. But even Beis Hillel agree that as long as daddy's holding his hand, can bring him up to the Harabayas, then that child should go. So if the child that's blind can be led by his father by the hand, so maybe that child should be obligated to go. So hey chidami, what's the case? So the Gemara says, I don't understand your question. The whole purpose of bringing a child is to educate the child for when he becomes an adult. If this child is permanently disabled, Rahman al-Itzlan, the child is permanently lame or the child is permanently blind, then what's the point? What, you're training him for adulthood? No, you're not. He's not going to be able to fulfill the mitzvah as an adult. So what's the point of training him as a child if he's permanently disabled? So lo tzricha b'chiger sheyachol lispashet v'suma sheyachol lispateach. Mai. So the question therefore is, we're talking about a child who's temporarily disabled. We anticipate that eventually the child will be rehabilitated and will be completely healthy by the time he reaches adulthood. So therefore you might argue that even though the child, were he to have the same condition as an adult, would be pater, but since we anticipate that as an adult he'll be healthy, maybe we should have to bring him up even though he's disabled right now. So that, right, the summa as well. Maybe the child only has temporary blindness, right? So we anticipate the child will recover. Maybe he's got, he looked into the sun for a day or whatever. But we anticipate that he'll recover. So the question is, what's the answer? So Amar Abaye, Kol heicha de gadol michayev midioraisa, katanami mechanchinan le midirabanan. Kol heicha de gadol pater midioraisa, midirabanan katanami pater. So the answer is, the Gemara tells us a klal, and the klal is Abaye, that you look at the child as if he were an adult right now. If the child were an adult right now, he would be in the physical condition where he'd have an obligation to make aliyah l'regel, so then we bring him with us now as well. But if the child in his present physical condition, were he an adult, would be pater, so then the child is pater as well. So therefore the answer is, if the child is blind even temporarily or disabled temporarily, we do not have there's no obligation to bring him.
If the child is healthy and the father is blind or lame, he loses out on the chana.
That's apparently so. That's what if the child's a yasom? Forget about if the child is the father's disabled. What if the child's an orphan? Yeah, in achinami. The father is only one with the mitzvah of chinuch, unless you want to argue that the beis din or the grandfather or other members of the community have to fill in for him. That's an interesting shaila that's, I'm sure, is undertaken by many poskim in other different situations. Upon whom is the mitzvah of chinuch when a child does not have a father who can do it? Okay. Well, speak to Rabbi Kerman, and he'll fill you in about the mitzvah of chinuch. What? Okay, grandfather. Then we go to the beis din, right? Yeah. Okay. Beishamai omrim hariyah shtei kesef v'chulei. So now we have another machlokus in the Mishnah. The Mishnah talks about the final machlokus in the Mishnah is about what do you have to spend more money on. We have two types of karbanos that we bring over the yontif. One is a korban ola, and the other one is a korban shlamim. Remember, the ola is called olas re'iyah because you're being seen by God, and the shlamim is called shalmei chagiga. The korban that's eaten by human beings as well as being offered to Hashem, is because it's a celebratory korban. You're celebrating through the eating of meat. So Beis Shammai say you have to spend more. You have to spend twice as much on the ola than you do on the shlamim. And Beis Hillel say just the opposite. You spend twice as much on the shlamim as you do on the ola. Now we're going to try and understand the basis of the machlokus with the following brisa. Tanu Rabbanan, Beis Shammai omrim hariyah shtei kesef v'chagiga ma'a kesef. Beis Shammai say spend twice as much on the ola than on the chagiga, than on the shlamim. Shahariyah ola kula legavoa mash enkin bechagiga. So Beis Shammai is going to give two arguments. Argument number one is the ola is completely for Hashem, and the shlamim is for you. So spend more on something that's completely for Hashem than on something that's partially for you. That's a very altruistic argument. The second argument, Va'od matzinu ba'atzeres sheriba behen hakasuv ba'olos yoser mi bashlamim. And furthermore, I have an exemplar of where the Torah says spend more on olas than you do on shlamim on Shavuos. If you look at the sacrificial order on Shavuos, you'll notice that it says a whole list of animals that you bring for olas, and then it just says, and then just bring 2 sheep for a shlamim on Shavuos. So therefore, you see that the communal karbanos on Shavuos, there's much more olas than shlamim, and therefore that's what you should do on every yontif as well. Beis Hillel omrim hariyah ma'akesef v'chagiga shtei kesef. Beis Hillel says just the opposite. Spend more on the shlamim than you do on the ola. Shechagiga yeshnu lifnei hadibur ma she'en kein b're'iyah. And my argument is that if you look at the end of Parshas Mishpatim, where it talks about what was going on at the time of Ma'amad Har Sinai, when the Jews were at Har Sinai about to receive the Torah, it says in Perek Chaf Daled that the Bechoros, that the youths of Bnei Yisrael, it says, Vayishlach es narei Bnei Yisrael vayalu olos, that Moshe sends forth the youths of Israel, and they bring burnt offerings, vayizbechu zevachim shlamim lashem parim, and they offer shlamim for Hashem as bulls. Now, the statement that Beis Hillel say is that you see from this pasuk that shlamim predate the giving of the Torah, and olas do not. Now, the pasuk I just quoted you talks both about olas and shlamim, so how Beis Hillel at face value can make this statement is very perplexing. We're going to explain this in just a moment. But the first argument of Beis Hillel is that you find that shlamim are more important because they were offered even before the Torah was given, which is not true by olas, and that's why you should spend more on shlamim. And my second argument is va'od matzinu b'nesiim sheriba ben hakasuv b'shlamim yoser mi ba'olos. And furthermore, when the tribal heads brought their inaugural sacrifices at the time of the Chanukah Samizbeach, is recorded in Parshas Nasa. We read this on Chanukah. You see that each Nasi brought many more shlamim than they brought olos. And therefore you see that you should spend more on shlamim than on olos. So 2 arguments of Beis Shammai, 2 arguments of Beis Hillel. Let's just review. The 2 arguments of Beis Shammai are, number 1, you should spend more on God than you spend on yourself. And number 2, we find that on Shavuos, that more animals were brought for olas than shlamim. 2 arguments of Beis Hillel. Number 1, we see that shlamim predate the giving of the Torah, which is not true by olas. And argument number 2, we see from the Nesiim that they brought more shlamim than they did olas. Okay, Beis Hillel, my time alo amri ke Beis Shammai. Why don't Beis Hillel agree to Beis Shammai's arguments? What problem do they have with Beis Shammai's arguments? Deka amart re'i adifa da ola kula legavoa. Adarabba chagiga adifa deis beishtei achilos. So to your first argument that you should spend more on God that you should spend on man, I can argue a counter argument. How many people or how many persons benefit from an ola? Only one person, Hashem. Hashem is the only party that benefits from an ola. How many parties benefit from a shlamim? 2 parties. Both Hashem, who gets a part of the animal, and human beings that get the other part. So it's 2 against 1. So therefore you should spend more on shlamim than you do on olas. And as far as the second argument, to kamart neilaf me'atzeres, done in carbon yachid mi carbon yachid, vein done in carbon yachid mi carbon sibor. And your second argument, that you want to bring a raya from Shavuos, that you bring more olas than shlamim, Shavuos is a communal sacrifice, whereas we're dealing with an individual's carbon. And therefore, it makes more sense to learn the status or the halach of an individual karban from also individuals who brought karbanos, which is the Nesiim. Shavuos is talking about how a whole community brings one set of karbanos. The 2 are not comparable. It could be that for communal karbanos, you should bring more olos than shlamim. But for an individual bringing karbanos, he should bring more shlamim than olos, as we see by the Nesiim. Now, I just want to point out that when we say that a korban chagiga is called a korban yachid, an individual korban, this is subjective, because there are times in Shas, let's say in Maseches Psachim, when we talk about the korban Pesach is called a korban sibor, which is why you can bring it on Shabbos, but it's still an individual korban. It's brought by an individual. So you have to know the context of when we say something is a korban yachid versus a korban sibor. Here, we're saying that in relation to the karbanos that are brought on Shavuos, because they're brought on behalf of the entire tzibur, one set of animals, that's called a korban sibur, versus the shlamim and the ola over here that are brought by each and every individual. In that context, it's called the korban yachid. Fine. Now, so we've defended Beis Hillel against Beis Shammai's arguments. Let's do the opposite. Beis Shammai my time lo amr ki Beis Hillel. Why don't Beis Shammai say like Beis Hillel? Dika amart chagiga adifa de yeshon lifnei hadibor ri'iyanami yeshon lifnei hadibor. So your first argument, Beis Hillel, that only the korban shalmei chagiga do we find being brought before the Torah is given. Well, the olas re'iyah is also brought before the Torah is given, because if you look at that same pasuk, it says vaya'alu olos, that they brought burnt offerings. And the burnt offerings, in other words, these were celebratory sacrifices, but it's also, that's why you can call it a shalmei chagiga. But you can also call it an olas re'iyah, like Rashi says, because at this point they were seeing God, so to speak. So it's therefore there's a re'iyah, there's a seeing aspect of these karbanos as well. So therefore, there were burnt offerings brought and shlamim offerings brought. So don't tell me that there's a superiority to shlamim because they were brought before Matan Torah. The olas were brought also. So and udekamart neilaf minasiyim danim davar hanoig ledoros min davar hanoig ledoros vein danim davar hanoig ledoros min davar sheinu hanoig ledoros. And as far as your second argument, that you should learn from the Nesiim's karbanos that you bring more shlamim than olos, the Nesiim's karbanos, that was a one-time gig. Right here, you want to learn about perennial karbanos that are brought every single yantiv. It doesn't make sense to learn from an example that was only done on a one-time basis. It makes more sense to learn from Shavuos, which is brought on an annual basis. Okay, fine. Now, Beis Hillel Maishna Chagiga D'Yeshn Lifnei Hadibor. So the elephant in the room is Beis Hillel's proof that the Shalmei Chagiga were brought before Matan Torah and Olas Re'iyah was not. He's bringing it from a pasuk, as I just quoted from you, from Parshas Mishpatim, that says explicitly that these youths that were atop Har Sinai brought both Olos and Shlamim. So how can Beis Hillel use this pasuk to tell me that only shlamim were brought before Matan Torah? So he says, "Ma'ishna chagiga deyeshen lifnei hadibor dichsiv vayizbechu zivachim shlamim." Says you Beis Hillel say that shalmei chagiga were brought before Matan Torah because at the end of the pasuk it says that they brought shlamim for Hashem. But re'iyah nami haksiv vayalu olos. But the olas re'iyah is also cited in that same pasuk because it says vayalu olos, that they brought burnt offerings. So the Gemara answers, Kasavri Beis Hillel, Ola she'ikriva Yisrael bamidbar olas tamid havai. Very interesting answer. Beis Hillel says, when it says Vaya'alu olos over here, it's not referring to a special celebratory festival ola, which would be the olas re'iyah, but it's rather referring to the daily korban tamid, which is a burnt offering. That's what it's referring to. So therefore, that's not the... Yes, it's true, they brought karbanos ola before Matan Torah, but the korban tamid, not an olas re'iyah, not a festival ola. The festival ola was only commanded after the Torah was given, and therefore the shalmei chagiga, which is the festival shlamim, has that advantage over the olas re'iyah. Beis Shammai savri ola shikriva Yisrael bamidbar olas re'iyah havai, and Beis Shammai disagree. And they say no. When the Torah says "Vaya'alu olos," it's referring to the olas re'iyah, and therefore from this pasuk you see that they have the same standing. Amar Abaye. So Abaye now tells us, Beis Shammai v'Rebbe Elazar v'Rebbe Shmuel kulhu svira lahu ola she'ikriva Yisrael bamidbar olas re'iyah havai. Ubeis Hillel v'Rebbe Akiva v'Rebbe Yossi Aglili kulu svira lahu ola she'ikriva Yisrael bamidbar olas tamid havai. So we have a three-way. In other words, we have a machlokes of teams. It's not just the machlokas Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, but it's a machlokas of Beis Shammai and his team, which includes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Eliezer. They all hold that the ola that was brought at Har Sinai was this olas re'iyah, And then we have Beis Hillel's team, which includes Beis Hillel, and it includes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Haglili. And that team holds that the Ola that was brought at Har Sinai was the Korban Tamid and was not the Olas Riyas. Now we're going to demonstrate how we have this alignment of teams.
Like an all-star.
It's an all-star cast, right? Right. So Beis Shammai Hada Amr. So what's Beis Shammai? We just explained. Beis Shammai says very clearly that the Ola that they brought at Har Sinai in the desert before the Mishkan was even erected was an Olas Re'iyah. And Rabbi Shmuel, the Tanya. What's Rabbi Shmuel? Rabbi Shmuel Oimer Klalos Nemru B'Sinai Upratos Be'Ohel Moed. I gave a whole shir on this one Shavuos night, probably when everyone was very tired and sleepy, so many of you may not remember it. But I think it was like about a year and a half ago. I gave the shir about this whole machlokas between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva as to the nature of what was communicated at Har Sinai as far as the detail of the mitzvahs. Rabbi Shmuel says that only the general information about each one of the Tariq mitzvahs was communicated at Har Sinai, but the details were taught during the 40 years that they were in the Midbar. But not all of the details were communicated at Har Sinai. And that's not the way Rashi on Chumash learns, obviously, but this is an important daya. So, and Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Akiva Omer Klalos Upratos Nemru B'Sinai V'nishnu Be'Ohel Moed V'nishdaloshu Ba'arvos Moav. And Rabbi Akiva says nothing of the sort. Every single detail of every single mitzvah was taught at Har Sinai. It was taught a second time when they erected the Mishkan, and it was taught a third time when they were at the plains of Moab 40 years later in preparation for entering into Eretz Yisrael, which is the purpose of Sefer Devar, Mishnah Torah, to review all of the details. So, now that we know that Rabbi Shmuel holds that only the general ideas, but not the details of each mitzvah were communicated at Har Sinai, V'Yisrael Kadaitach, Ola Shikri V'Yisrael B'Midbar, Ola Stamid Avai, Mi Kamid D'Mi Korla Boy Hefshe V'Nituach, Ola Basof Boy Hefshe V'Nituach. Then it turns out that all of the details of bringing a Korban Tamid were not yet communicated. According to you, Beis Hillel, if they brought a Korban Tamid before the Torah was even given and all the details were taught, how could they bring the Korban Tamid properly? They didn't know yet the halacha that you're supposed to flay the hide and dismember the carcass before you burn it. So how could it be? What are you going to tell me? That they first they burnt a whole animal, a whole carcass without the flaying and dismembering, and then later on they changed the protocol? That doesn't make sense. And therefore we must conclude that according to Rabbi Shmuel, they didn't start bringing the Korban Tamid until they were taught all the details. And this proves that Rabbi Shmuel is aligned with Beis Shammai, that the Ola that was brought at Har Sinai was not an Olas Tamid, it was an Olas Re'iyah. Rabbi Elazar, the Tanya, Olas Tamid ha'asiyah b'Har Sinai. So what's Rabbi Elazar? He says, the Brisa quotes the pasuk in the Torah which talks about the daily Korban Tamid. And it says that it was ha'asuyah b'Har Sinai, that was made at Har Sinai. So what does that mean? Rabbi Elazar Omer, ma'aseha nemru b'Sinai, v'hi atzma lo kareva. He says that even though the Jews were taught at Har Sinai how to bring the Korban Tamid, but it was not yet brought until they actually erected the Mishkan. So you see very clearly that according to Rebbe Lazar, the Korban Tamid was not brought at Har Sinai. And that also indicates that when it says Vaya'alu Olos in the Pasuk at Har Sinai, it's not referring to the Korban Tamid, it's referring to the Olas Re'iyah. So we've got again Beis Shammai, Rabbi Shmuel, and Rebbe Lazar. Fantastic. Rabbi Akiva Omer Kreva V'Shuv Lo Paska. Rabbi Akiva disagrees with Rabbi Lazar, and he says no. The Korban Tamid was brought at Har Sinai, and it was brought perpetually from that point onwards. Elama'ani Makayim. So then, if that's the case, then what does the Navi Amos mean when he says rhetorically, Hazvachem umincha higashtem li bamidbar boim shana Beis Yisrael? He says, asking the Jews, did you really bring me for 40 straight years all of the karbanos in the desert? You didn't. So how can the prophet say that did not take place if, according to you, Rabbi Akiva, as soon as we got the Torah, we brought karbanos perpetually? So the Gemara answers, Shifto Shalevi Shalo Avdu Avodah Zarah Heini Krivu Osa. The answer is that Shevet Levi, who did not participate in Avodah Zarah, they took it upon themselves to bring all the karbanos perpetually, and the rest of Klal Yisrael faltered at different intervals throughout their sojourn in the desert. So that's the way Rabbi Akiva learns it. But he says, Rabbi Akiva says that there was perpetual bringing of karbanos, even from the times of when they were at Har Sinai, and that's Rabbi Akiva L'Shitaso, who says that they brought the korban tamid in the pasuk in Parshas Mishpatim. So now, Beis Hillel, now let's go to the other team. We got Beis Hillel, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Beis Hillel Hada Amran, Beis Hillel we just said, he says that the korban tamid was brought at Har Sinai. And Rabbi Akiva Hanami da Amran. And Rabbi Akiva also, we've just demonstrated, Rabbi Akiva says that as soon as they got to Har Sinai, they started bringing all the karbanos, including the korban tamid. So therefore, also it would seem that when the Torah says Vaya'alu olos, it's referring to the korban tamid. And Rabbi Yossi Haglili, what's Rabbi Yossi Haglili? The Tanya, Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer, Shalosh mitzvos nitztavu Yisrael ba'alosam l'regel. That the Jewish people, when they were given the mitzvahs of the Shalosh Regalim, they were given 3 mitzvahs that are all distinct from one another. Re'iyah, v'chagiga, v'simcha. The 3 mitzvahs are bringing the Olas Re'iyah, bringing the Shalmei Chagiga, and the mitzvah of Simcha, which means eating the sacrificial meat. It's a separate mitzvah, which means that if, let's say, you have a very large family, and you bring just 1 shlamim for the Shalmei Chagiga, but there's not enough meat to go around, then you have an obligation to bring more shlamim karbanos in order to be able to supplement the provision of meat for the rest of the mishpacha. And the Brisa says, Yesh b're'iyah, this is Rabbi Yossi Haglili continuing, he says, Yesh b're'iyah shein b'shteyem, Yesh b'chagiga shein b'shteyem, and Yesh b'simcha shein b'shteyem. Of these 3 mitzvos, each mitzvah of the 3 has a unique feature that do not exist by the other 2. Yesh b're'iyah shein b'shteyem, sha're'iyah ola kula legavoa ma shein kin b'shteyem. So what's the unique feature of the olas re'iyah? It's completely burnt, whereas the other 2 involve human indulgence. Yesh b'chagiga ma she'en kein b'shteyem, shechagiga yeshen lifnei hadibur ma she'en kein b'shteyem. What's the unique feature of the Shalmei Chagiga? Only the shlamim was brought before Matan Torah, whereas the other 2 were only commanded to the Jews to partake of, or to do, after the Torah was given. So right here you see that Rabbi Yossi Haglili holds that the only korban that was brought at Har Sinai before the Torah was given were the shlamim, the Shalmei Chagiga, but the olos that were brought must have been a korban tamid. And finally he says, Yesh b'simcha ma she'en b'shteihem, sha'simcha noheges b'anashim u'b'nashim ma she'en kin b'shteihem. What's the unique feature of the mitzvah of simcha? That it applies equally to men and to women, that women have to partake in the mitzvah of simcha, of eating meat, whereas the other 2 mitzvahs are unique to only men, because they only men have an obligation to bring the Shalmei Chagiga and to bring the Olas Re'iyah. So that shows that Rabbi Yossi Haglili is also aligned with Beis Hillel. So now the question is, Rabbi Yishmael, let's go back. You said that Rabbi Yishmael is on Beis Shammai's team. On what basis did you come to that conclusion? It says, "My taima kamukmas lo kebeis Shammai isal kadaitach ola sheikrivi yisol bamidbar ola stamid havai mi kamida demi kar lo boy hefshe benituach albasach boy hefshe benituach." So the argument that you presented to me, says the Gemara, is that if, according to Rabbi Yishmael, they didn't yet have the details of how to bring the korban tamid when they were first at Har Sinai, then how can you tell me they brought a korban tamid without the right protocol? It would turn out that they first burned the animal whole without flaying it and without dismembering it, and later on, when they got the details, the protocol changed and they had to first flay it and dismember it. That doesn't make sense, says the Gemara, that Rabbi Yishmael would say that they changed in the middle of their history the protocol of how to offer the korban tamid. That was the argument. But wait a minute. V'ha Rabbi Yossi Haglili da'amar ola shikrivi yisol b'midbar olas tamid havai. And meikar lo boy hefshe v'nituach lo basof boy hefshe v'nituach. But I'll show you that there's a Tana who holds that's taka what happened. According to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, when they first brought the korban tamid, and remember, Rabbi Yossi Haglili holds that they did bring the korban tamid at Har Sinai, and he also holds that they originally brought it burning the animal whole, without flaying it and without dismembering it, and later, when they got the details, they changed the protocol and they had to first flay it and dismember it. And how do I know this? The Tanya Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer Ola Shukrivi Yisol Bamidbar Ena Tuuna Hefshe V'nitoach Lafi Shein Hefshe V'nitoach Ela Me'ol Moed Va'elach. Rabbi Yossi Haglili is quoted explicitly saying that when they first started with the korban tamid at Har Sinai, they didn't have to flay it, they didn't have to dismember the carcass, and they just burnt it as a whole animal. And it was only when they got to Ohel Moed did the law change and the protocol change, and they had to first flay it and dismember it. So you see that even though you had a problem with that, Rabbi Yossi Aglili says quite straight, I have no problem with that. Yes, there are certain times when the protocol is one way before the Mishkan, and the protocol changes once we have the Mishkan.
But did they kill the animal?
Of course they killed. Of course they had to do the shechita. Of course, of course. The question is, how did they burn it? So Rabbi Yosef Lili has no problem with saying the protocol changes. So why your whole proof that Rabbi Yishmael is aligned with Beis Shammai is saying because doesn't stand to reason that the protocol would change in the middle. But why? Why does it not stand to reason? You see, Rabbi Yosef Lili has no problem with that. So maybe Rabbi Yishmael says they burnt it one way at Har Sinai and then they changed once they got the details at the Mishkan. So the Gemara says, you're right. Samim Ikan Rabbi Yishmael. All right, take off Rabbi Yishmael's name. Beis Shammai just lost a valuable player, right? Beis Shammai is now Beis Shammai and Rebbe Lazar, right? Rabbi Yishmael has been removed from the roster, right? We're going to take him off because we cannot prove that he's aligned with Beis Shammai. Now, boy Rav Chisda, haikra heichi ksiv. So now Rav Chisda asks a very interesting question. The question that he asks is that let's go back to that pasuk, and it's unfortunate. I'm just going to read the pasuk to you. You have to really see the pasuk inside. It says, "Vayishlach es na'arei bnei Yisrael." Moshe sends forth the youths of Israel, vaya'alu alos, and they bring burnt offerings. Vayizbechu zivachim shlamim lashem parim, and they offer shlamim offerings to Hashem as bulls. Now, the only animal that's mentioned by name in this pasuk is what? Parim. Normally, a korban ola, a generic korban ola is what? Is a keves, is a sheep. So the question that Rav Chis is going to ask is, the word bulls, which is the last word of the pasuk, does it apply both to olos and shlamim, or does it apply only to the latter part of the pasuk, which is shlamim? In other words, did they offer sheep as olos and bulls as shlamim, or does the word parim apply to both olot and shlamim, so that they offered both burnt offerings of bulls and shlamim offerings as bulls? This is the question. So, in other words, do you pause the pasuk after the word olos and include, in other words, in parentheses, that their burnt offerings were sheep? And then vayizbechu zevachim shlamim lashem parim, and then the second part, which is talking about shlamim, only there the word parim applies. Al dilma idi v'idi parim havu, or maybe no, maybe both the first part, which is olas, and the second part, which is shlamim, are both referring to bulls being brought for both.
So what do you say with kvasim? What would kvasim be there for?
The word kvasim isn't written in the pasuk.
It's not.
It's not written. It's just he's saying in parentheses you put the word kvasim because generically, anytime you see an ola, normally it refers to kvasim. So the Gemara says, "Lamai nafkamina." What difference does it make? It's a historical event. What difference would it make? So Mar Zutra Amar Lepisuk Ta'amim. So Mar Zutra says a very important chiluk. You have to know how to lane the pasuk in shul. Is there an esnachta at the word olos, which is the way we have it in our Masorah, right? In which case the word parim is not referring back to olos, or do you read it straight with a trup that leads into the last part of the pasuk? So therefore, the word parim would be going on olos. You see very clearly from here that we have to be very makbid, right, Mendel, on the Bal Kriya. We have to make sure that he knows how to lane properly, and we have to make sure that he knows where to pause, and that he doesn't run through an esnachta or run through a sof pasuk. And sometimes you have to even correct the Bal Kriya, not only if he doesn't pronounce the words correctly, but if he doesn't do the trup correctly, such that it will change the meaning of the pasuk, right? So that's what?
Let's eat grandma.
Let's eat grandma, right? As you say, right? You got to say, let's eat grandma instead of let's eat grandma, right? So, right? That's right. So anyway, so that's the nafkamina. The nafkamina is how do you lane it in shul? Rav Acha b'rei de Rava Amar la'omer harei alai ola kola shikri b'yisol b'midbar mai. Parim havu o kvasim havu. So Rav Acha says there's another very important nafkamina. What if a person takes a neder? He says, I hereby pledge to bring a korban ola that was exactly like the ola that was brought in the midbar in Har Sinai, at Har Sinai. So the question is, what is that ola? Is it a sheep or is it a cow? And you have to know in order to be able to fulfill your neder. So the Gemara says, we're not sure, we'll let it sit. And here's where we'll let it sit. Have a wonderful day.
Very nice.